Well, our retirement planning firm, Imagine Financial Security, officially turned 4 in February, and I've been wanting to do a podcast, little celebration for this one. And so here we are in March, better late than never, I guess. But to celebrate, I thought we would do an episode, more of a lighter episode, if you will, just sharing some of my initial experiences going independent as a financial advisor. So I'm going to touch on 4 things I really miss about working for a large financial institution. And then I'm going to talk about 4 things that I'm loving about being independent. For those of you that are new, my name is Kevin Lau. I'm the host of the Planning for Retirement podcast, and I'm also the owner and financial planner at Imagine Financial Security. We help individuals over 50 with over $1 million maximize their retirement spending, minimize their lifetime tax bill, and worry less about the financial markets. If that describes you, make sure to follow our show and make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We put out weekly retirement planning content designed specifically for you. PFR Nation is what I like to call y'all. And if you're interested in learning more about working with us one-on-one, make sure to start with the Retirement Readiness Questionnaire linked in the description, or you can just visit our website at www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com. So why am I doing this episode? At the end of the day, I've done some episodes in the past about why I decided to go independent, but now that we're 4 years in, I've got a little bit of a clearer perspective on the pros and cons of being an advisor at both a big firm as well as running my own independent firm. And most of you are not advisors, but perhaps you work with one, or perhaps you plan to work with a financial advisor in the future. So hopefully this helps kind of set the stage in terms of, hey, what are some of those pros and cons of working with an independent versus working with an advisor at a bigger firm? And I also know some advisors actually do listen to this podcast. So I wanted to speak to you as well and just share a little bit about my career trajectory in hopes that it helps yours. So before we dive into today's episode, today is Thursday, the 20th. I'm recording this on the 20th. And there was a really big Fed meeting yesterday where Jay Powell decided to leave rates as is. So no rate cuts yet in 2025. And the markets reacted very positively to this one. I think largely because of Powell's comments about inflation. Okay, so in fact, Powell mentioned there could be some challenges in 2025, just like Trump has mentioned, okay, the whole time. Ever since he's been enacting these tariffs, he mentioned we could have some bumps in the road. It could be some challenges in the short term. But Powell used the word transitory when discussing the potential tariff inflation for 2025 and beyond. And if you recall, back in 2022, that was Powell's famous last words, calling inflation transitory, which it was anything but transitory. But the markets, essentially are pricing in inflation to rise to about 2.8% by December of 2025. This is a little bit of a hotter read relative to what the expectation was at the end of December of last year. But ultimately, in 2026, the expectation is that inflation would then cool to 2.2%, very close to the Fed target at that point in time. And we talked about this in episode 60, what to watch for in the markets. Inflation is still the number one issue to watch for, okay? And this is obvious. We've talked about inflation. We've talked about the impact of tariffs potentially on inflation. And 2025 could mean a little bit of a step backwards before taking multiple steps forward going forward. So it's going to be really interesting to track inflation and the progress for 2025 and ultimately what Powell does. Because right now, the markets are pricing in 2 rate cuts for 2025. So really be on the lookout for that. If we don't see 2 rate cuts in 2025, we can definitely see a potential further drop in the markets from here. We're already in correction territory. We hit correction territory in the NASDAQ a couple of weeks ago, the S&P 500 last week, but then we've seen a little bit of a rally this past week. And I believe the markets really rallied positively because unemployment is still in check, around 4%. Wages are still growing, just over 4% as well. Both of those contribute positively to the economy. But I think some of the most encouraging news so far was on some of the manufacturing data. Okay, so in short, manufacturing activity expanded in January after 26 consecutive months of contraction. Okay, so I'm really going to be watching the manufacturing data and the numbers that are coming out going forward, because that also could potentially alleviate some of these inflationary concerns. Because if we have tariffs for imports, those goods become a little bit more expensive. But if we're building things, if we're manufacturing things here in the US, and we don't need to import anything with those high tariffs, that could help with that inflation story. But the number one thing I am really looking at with regards to inflation is oil prices. Okay, it's one of the number one factors when it comes to inflation, which is a big part of why we saw such high inflation in 2022. If you remember, that was the year that Russia invaded Ukraine and really Russia is a big player when it comes to oil exports. And so oil prices went through the roof, inflation went through the roof, partly because of oil prices, but partly because of the global supply chain and many other factors that contribute to inflation. But I think the good news is that we're seeing oil prices start to come down a little bit. You're probably seeing that a little bit at the pump right now. I believe last time I checked, crude oil was somewhere around $64 per barrel. So significantly lower than some of those peaks that we saw back in 2022. It was really about double that. So I'm going to be really paying attention to oil prices, continuing to track the health of the economy with inflation. But I'm just going to continue to caution everyone, continue to hold tight. We're going to continue to see some volatility because these inflation readings are going to be choppy, in my opinion, just because there's so much uncertainty with tariffs. What tariffs are being implemented? What is a threat of tariffs? And ultimately, when those tariffs it can actually come into effect. So there's so much unknown. There's so much uncertainty. And I, as always, keep a level head about these things. Be informed, pay attention, but just remember the media is out there to be entertainment these days. Okay, they're not reporting the news anymore. They are straight up entertainment. So just take what they say with a little bit of a grain of salt. Okay. So with that out of the way, I recognize first and foremost, I've got an extreme bias for the independent space. I mentioned those of you that have been following the podcast for a while, I worked for my first 12 years of my career. I worked for two different big firms, 6 years at the first one, 6 years at the second one. And I'll tell you, there were some great benefits, great experiences working for big firms. And I'm going to touch on those. I'm saying all this because I am extremely biased towards the independent space. Otherwise, I wouldn't continue to do this. I'd probably jump ship. I would have already jumped ship. Okay, 4 years in, it was not the easy path. I'm telling you right now, it was not the easy path going out on my own, starting my own firm, especially during the height of a pandemic, especially with 3 boys under the age of 2 years old at that point in time. It was a hard road for us personally and obviously financially too. It's one of those things I had to invest a lot of my money, a lot of my savings into my business to get things up and running, start to build up a client roster, and now beginning to hire people, which, by the way, congrats officially to Roberto. He's officially a licensed investment advisor representative with our firm, and his new title is Associate Financial Planner. So he's worked extremely hard over the last year with our firm, serving our clients. And our clients are just loving Roberto's attention to detail, his knowledge of the tax code, and really just his love for personal financial planning. So congrats, Roberto, on that. And I'm really looking forward to this next chapter in your career. But anyways, so just know I am very biased, but I'm going to try to start with the 4 really good things about working with the big firm, both as a client and as an advisor. And I would say the first thing that I guess I would say I miss or that I really enjoyed about working for a big firm is really the camaraderie. I grew up playing competitive sports growing up, and it's really an area of my life that I miss dearly. I try to get my competitive juices out, playing golf, but it's like, I really call that more of a game, not really a sport. And certainly it's a team sport sometimes, but oftentimes you're playing individually. But, I definitely miss that aspect of the camaraderie, going to conferences together, building your businesses together as a big team. Okay. I think that's a big reason why if I were recommending someone starting out of college or recommending a career changer, I'd probably say, hey, you probably don't want to start your own firm, or truthfully, you may not even want to join a small independent firm at the beginning. You may want to cut your teeth a little bit and work for a bigger company just so you can pick the brains of all these individuals that have been there for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Now, the trap on that one is sometimes you can get trapped. Ultimately, the compensation structure and how these things work is, sometimes it's almost like you're disincentivized to leave some of those bigger firms. So that's one of those things I remember early on in my career, the first few years, I was talking to some of the advisors that have been there for 10, 15 years. And we had kind of briefly kicked around, hey, what are your thoughts about independence? Because that movement really began to take shape and really accelerate, I feel like, in the early 2010s. But I remember a lot of advisors would tell me at that point, they're like, hey, listen, I'm kind of stuck. I can't leave. My renewals are too high. It would cost me so much money to leave. And a lot of that was true. But I think it was also just kind of the fear of the unknown. But ultimately, there is a lot of value in sort of doing this business together because it can be a very lonely business. Running an independent firm, if I were to do this, if I would have done this right out of college, I would have failed in a heartbeat because I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know how to run a business. I didn't know how to be a financial advisor. I didn't know the skill sets that I needed at that point in time. And so I believe that first 12 years of experience in my career working for big firms and really the first 4 years of running my own RIA, really has helped really kind of formulate how we are going to run our practice, who we're going to serve, and really getting super clear on that. But the second thing I'll throw out there, which I think is really, really important, is like the client relationships and the volume you experience with those relationships. So like it's almost like the volume. I talk about the volume in a negative sense, a lot of the times, with regards to who we serve and how we serve them, because I think that is actually a benefit of being independent. We don't need to serve hundreds and thousands of potential clients and customers. We can serve 50 to 100 clients very, very well, depending on the size of our team. But there is a value early on in your career to having the volume of client relationships, because you have experience in like dealing with so many different client case studies and different personalities and just so many different potential financial outcomes based on your advice and recommendations. So I feel like those at bats, I guess I would call them, early on in my career, that first 12, 13, 14 years working as a financial advisor really helped me today to get super clear on who we want to work with and how we want to work with them. But early on, I think that is a big value in working with a big firm, is that you can just speak to a lot of different people. Now, as a client, though, kind of that is a negative, okay? Because, ultimately you are, in a sense, you are just a number, because ultimately the metrics and how things operate with these big organizations, they need to be profitable at the end of the day. They need to show their metrics to upper management and the executive team, the folks sitting in the boardroom, thousands of miles away. They need to show the value of what you're doing. And that really shows up into how many client relationships, how much in fees are you generating, how much revenue you're bringing into the firm. So it is kind of a negative side to being a client working with the bigger firm, is that you are probably one of several hundred client relationships that advisor is serving. And it does create some complexity in terms of doing real comprehensive financial planning. The third thing I'll throw out there is really the career paths are super attractive. Oftentimes working at these big firms, you can start as, let's say, an associate and work up to a lead, and then maybe even get into management. That's something that's interesting to you. Manage a team of advisors. When I was 21 years old, coming out of college, and I joined the financial services space, I've talked about this before, but I started in the industry in 2008 during the Great Recession. I was a finance major. No banks were hiring. No financial institutions were hiring. The only ones that were hiring were companies that were basically offering sales jobs as a financial representative or advisor. Really, they sell this dream really, really well. And I remember what attracted me to this industry is the recruiting team kind of just pitched this idea of like the 3 I's. And the 3 I's were income potential, independence, and impact. And I was like, oh man, I was a 21-year-old with a lot of hopes and dreams and goals, especially someone who didn't have a lot of, I would say, motivation during my college years. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do in college. Like, I feel like I had a lot of people that were like, oh, I want to be a CPA. I want to be an accountant. I really stumbled on this career because I got sort of lured in to the financial services space. But once I was lured in, it was really attractive. This idea of income potential, earning a decent living so I can support a family one day, independence, so having flexibility to, long-term to have some independence. Now, early on, there wasn't a lot of independence, but over the long term, after you build up your client base, that was very attractive to me. And ultimately the impact that you have on people. And I didn't really know what that looked like until years being into the business and then seeing these client cases and client stories play out right in front of me or through the grapevine and really seeing the impact that we have on people. But these big firms, they really do a great job in like selling the career path. And believe me, I drank the Kool-Aid. I really loved the potential opportunity. And like, truthfully, when I first joined my firm, like I thought I was going to stay there for the entire duration of my career until I really truly learned about becoming a CFP, doing comprehensive financial planning, learning about the independent space. And that really was challenging for me because I was doing this for 2, 3, 4 years out of college and then realizing, hey, this is probably not the place I'm going to be. That was very, very difficult. Okay. But, I drank the Kool-Aid and, I also met my wife at my first firm. So like there was a reason I was there. Okay. Let's put it that way. I'm a man of faith and there was a reason I started there in the first place, even though it was not meant to be my forever destination. There were so many things I learned and relationships that I built there, skills that I developed, and of course, my beautiful bride, Jessica. So that was a huge win, I guess you could say, working for that company. The fourth thing I'll throw out there is the financial compensation and the benefits. I would say it's a pretty lucrative opportunity working in the financial services space because it's hard. It's very difficult. Okay. And that's the reason I'm coming to realize this over time is that The reason that the best advisors are so well compensated is because most advisors fail in the first few years. They don't succeed. Okay. And I think things are changing now where firms are operating more as teams, even within these big firms. Like before, it was like you're on an island, you eat what you kill, and that's it. And that's why there was so much turnover. Advisors would kind of circle in and out of different firms. They wouldn't work out, they'd go work somewhere else, or they would totally leave the industry in general. But the compensation structure was very, very attractive at some of these big firms. The longer you stay with the renewals and the incentives and the trips and of course the benefits. Some of them offer pensions. Health insurance was paid for the most part, which I'm realizing now. I'm like, that's a nice little benefit, especially looking at my premium right now, what I pay for a family policy that doesn't even cover anything. I mean, it's ridiculous. I learned that, okay, if we didn't have insurance, there's a price tag. But because we have insurance, we're paying more out of pocket. I'm like, what's going on here with our healthcare system? If someone can help answer that question for me, I'd appreciate that, because we have the Cadillac insurance plan, but it's still paying for very little. And I don't know if it's the billing codes these doctors are trying to put out there to the insurance companies so they can get paid more. I don't know what's going on, but something doesn't really smell right. So anyways, I digress on that one. But the benefits and the compensation are a really big part of why I think working for a big firm is very, very attractive. Okay. I think some of the key issues for me, and I've talked about these before, but the compensation and the dream, that was very attractive for me. That lured me in, right? But I think going through my first few years working for a big firm, I didn't really like the feeling of this like bait and switch type of practice. And I'm not saying every advisor at big firms are doing a bait and switch. Okay. Trust me. There are some advisors at big firms, phenomenal. I'd recommend my own parents work with them. But as a whole, I didn't like the bait and switch, meaning like, hey, we're going to put ourselves out there as a financial advisor or a financial planner, but we only get paid if you buy something from us. It's like going to a car dealership as a customer and going to them and saying, hey, do you think I should buy a new car? Like that's kind of how it feels, but you don't even know you're going to a car dealership, if that makes any sense. Like you're going to this financial professional thinking you're going to get comprehensive advice, not really realizing that really they're there to sell you a product. Okay. And so I didn't love that idea. I didn't love that feeling of bait and switch. And that's really when I started to kind of get this feeling of like, okay, how can we do this a little differently? And going through the CFP program at Georgetown, like in 2010, 2011, and learning about the independent space, I said, okay, this is interesting. Times are changing. I think customers are getting a little bit more savvy. They're expecting something different. They're expecting a different experience on the back end. And I would too. I wouldn't want to go to an advisor and say, okay, hey, I'm on the brink of retirement. I want to trust you with my life savings. And ultimately, all they're there for is to really sell you a product or service that company is offering. I didn't like that business model. Okay. And I also didn't like the outdated feeling of generating new clients and new business. Like this idea of like cold calling or door knocking or asking like friends and family for referrals. Like, I remember when I first started in my career, they had me list down or write down a list of 200 family and friends or potential friends that I kind of knew loosely that I could call and ask for leads. I mean, I did it because I was 21 years old and I was stupid, but I love what we're doing now in terms of bringing people in this way. Okay. Bringing people in through our content creation, talking about the value we provide to clients and letting the right fit clients reach out to us. Again, I've mentioned this on the podcast before and I'm dead serious about this. I am not going to allow any new clients into the firm unless they are current podcast listeners or they've listened to at least a few episodes. All right. And we've got a little process down. When someone books or when someone fills out the retirement readiness questionnaire, they get hit with a couple of those links with the podcast. So it's just, I'm very keen on this one. It's like just attracting the right type of people. And I didn't like that business model in terms of just like throwing spaghetti at the wall and see who sticks. But I did it anyways, like I said, for a period of years. And that really helped me. Again, and that's kind of the catch-22 in this one is without that experience, I would not be where I am today. Learning about different personalities, working with different personalities, doing thousands of different case studies with clients from all walks of life, all different financial situations. That really helped me get to where I am. So it would be disingenuous for me to say that was a waste of time. It was not a waste of time. And truthfully, I'm so thankful I went through that process and cut my teeth at those big firms. But I just didn't like the idea of kind of being pigeonholed on how we're actually delivering our value proposition. I didn't like the fact that, hey, there's a limited number of outcomes we can provide because of the firm we're working for. They've got some insurance solutions, some investment solutions they want us to pitch based on their P&L and what their revenue metrics are. I just didn't like that idea. I wanted the idea of like, let's learn about the client facts. Let's come up with a plan and let's put that advice out there that's in their best interest, regardless of if there's a product involved or a service involved. And I love how our compensation structure works now. So anyways, learning about the independent space, I didn't have the courage at that point in time because, I learned about the independent space around 2012. I just didn't have the competence and the courage to go out and go independent at that point in time. So I spent the next decade cutting my teeth at big firms really up until 2020. And, at that point in time, I was like, okay, it was a tough call. I've mentioned this before, but it was one of those things that I was presented a great opportunity. During the height of the pandemic, our company was going through restructuring and I was able to take a buyout. And my wife and I had done really well saving and investing up until that point. My wife was staying at home with our oldest son and I was able to take a nice little buyout and take that and run. But it was a really uncertain time because everything was going virtual. It was the height of the pandemic. No one was meeting in person. I saw that as an opportunity to go independent and actually run my practice mostly virtually, which was what we are today. But the four things that I'm like so happy about being independent, I wrote down four things. There are more, but the four things I wrote down, the first one I'm going to throw out there is the creativity involved. Financial planning can feel very rigid at times. And I think it feels even more rigid when you're working in the large bureaucracy. Because of the volume, it's hard to be creative. Like you have to be like a Chick-fil-A drive-through. You know what I mean? It's got to be like, boom, boom, boom. This is what we offer. Come in, get your chicken nuggets, and then leave. Whereas being independent, we've got the time to really think about every client case a little bit more thoughtfully and coming up with solutions that are a little bit out of the box. Things like guardrails and things about how we actually internalize or interpret the Monte Carlo simulation, Social Security timing, insurance solutions. There are so many different things that we can be creative with. And it also bleeds into a little bit about our process around client reviews, having a formal review in the beginning of the year and then an end of year tax planning review. Like we can be creative with our process based on the clients we serve. And so we're very intentional about the types of people we serve, over 50, north of $1 million, invested for retirement. A large part of that is in tax deferred buckets. So we can come up with creative solutions for that particular segment of people and deliver it like a Chick-fil-A drive-through, but do it in a way that is just a little bit more thoughtful. And I'd also throw out the creativity piece is like, never in a million years would I be able to do this podcast working for a big firm or start a YouTube channel. And I do believe this has benefited me two ways. I think number one is probably the obvious one. It's, certainly generated new clients to the firm. And that's a big reason I'm going to continue to do the podcast. I feel like in the YouTube channel is I want people to learn about our firm, who we serve, how we do things, how we think about certain situations around investment strategies or Roth conversions or income distribution strategies or insurance or estate planning. I want our potential clients to learn about us. So that way we don't have to go out and do a bunch of cold calling. I don't have to spend any time on marketing other than doing this podcast. So literally this is all I do. But then the second benefit is that I'm spending time preparing for the podcast by really researching topics and spending time like sharpening my saw. And I believe that's such a value because working at big firms, I'm not even exaggerating on this one. 90% of the activities involved working for big firms are sales related. They are trying to find, I remember the quote that my managing partner used to throw out there all the time is like, Kevin, your job is to see people or fight to see people. And so like there wasn't anything about, hey, let's learn the ropes of financial planning. And rightfully so, because you ate what you killed. And so if you didn't have people you were sitting in front of, you could not get compensated. Therefore, you had to spend all of your efforts on cold calling, marketing, door knocking, meeting with centers of influence. And that's, again, that helped shape my career and sort of where I am today. But now what I can do is I can focus my time, effort, and energy on researching things, researching the markets a little bit more, researching these tax planning strategies, researching these income distribution strategies and Social Security timing and sharpening our saw for the clients that we serve. And then organically, that also brings in new business to our firm because they're listening to our podcast and YouTube channel. They're like, I like how they think. At Imagine Financial Security, I want to hire them and work with them during this next chapter as we approach retirement and go through retirement. Because truthfully, a lot of our clients are very smart. They're very smart individuals. They're very capable of DIYing their strategy throughout retirement. But I think the beauty is they understand the value of their time and they know that, hey, delegating this is going to free up my time in my golden years. Like, what do I want to spend my time on in my 60s or 70s? Do I want to spend my time on thinking about the markets or thinking about when to do Roth conversions or thinking about how much to convert or thinking about the timing of Social Security or where their income is coming from every month or every year? No, they want to spend time on traveling, taking golf trips, spending time with their families, doing hobbies that they've never had time to do over the last 20 to 30 years because they're raising kids and in their careers. So there's so many benefits in terms of the creativity factor that I'm super excited about. The second thing I'll throw out there is just the people and the relationships. I mentioned the volume of relationships being the positive working for the big firms. So again, I'm going to sort of take the other angle on this one is that we don't need to go volume. We can focus on quality, okay, of the relationship and really bringing in the right types of people to our firm. Okay, not only clients, but also team members. Okay, this is a big one. I've talked about Roberto before. I've talked about Amy before on the podcast. I mean, this is our team. We're lean and mean, but what we do is we worked well together and I can select the type of people I work with, not only internally at my team, but also the clients that we bring into our firm. There have been times I've had sort of these mutual fit meetings with people. And I'm like, even though they have the financial means to hire us and it makes sense to do so potentially from a value add standpoint, there wasn't a mutual fit there from a relationship standpoint. And I think choosing the type of people we work with has been a huge benefit for me because as a result, when we're going through review season and I'm looking at my calendar and I see my calendar fill it up with the clients that we serve, the families that we serve, I'm like excited. I'm like, yes, I get to talk to them about their vacation. I get to talk to them about their RV rally that they attended. I get to talk to them about their grandkids. These are people that we truly care about, we like working with. And I think that's a big value add being independent is that we can focus on the quality of our relationships and go deeper with our clients, as opposed to if you're serving 500 or 600 people, sometimes people would reach out to me working at those big firms. And I'm like, I don't even remember their situation. I need to go back into my notes and do a bunch of research on this one. Whereas now it's like, we get an email or a phone call, I pretty much know their whole financial plan in the back of my head. So that's a big reason why I'm loving the independent space. Number 3, I'll throw in there is we can actually talk about taxes. And we've talked about taxes on the podcast a bunch. And truthfully, that was a big reason why Roberto, when he reached out to me last year, looking for an opportunity, his tax experience doing tax preparation, I'm like, this is what I need. This is what I want because our clients want to talk about taxes. What's surprising to many people is that the largest expense for at least the clients we serve, I'm not saying like everyone in America, their largest expense is taxes, but for our clients that we serve, it's either number 1 or number 2 in terms of their top expenses are typically taxes, somewhere in those top 2. And people don't realize that. And so when we really look through the opportunities and kind of understand like, hey, every movement of money has a tax consequence. Wouldn't it make sense for us to be able to talk about taxes with our clients? The answer to me is absolutely yes. And I've joked about this before, but I'm dead serious about this one. I had a conversation with my chief compliance officer at my last firm just because I mentioned the word tax in an email. Well, I had a one-on-one on their calendar and all of a sudden it was, hey, they're grilling me about giving tax advice. And I said, I wasn't even giving tax advice. I was just having a conversation about their tax situation, which probably, by the way, it's probably a worthy conversation to have, don't you think? We've talked about this on the podcast with Roberto before, like tax preparation is not tax planning. And this is so true. I cannot emphasize this enough is that the CPA or tax preparer that you've hired to file your taxes, we're right on the cusp of the tax filing deadline. They are typically not designed to provide comprehensive tax planning advice for you. You're not paying their fee to do so. If you're paying a few $100 for them to file your return, they don't have the time nor capacity, and nor is that fee worth that for them to really do a deep dive into your whole financial situation and figure out where are the tax planning opportunities for you specifically to reduce your lifetime tax bill. And so, in my opinion, this was a big reason why I left the big firm to go independent. And this is like really solidified over the last few years. And certainly since now Roberto has joined the firm, is like, we're going deep on taxes. We're looking at tax returns. We're reviewing the tax returns. We actually have a tax planning software that we use to help us review the tax returns and come up with opportunities. So there's just so much there that we can help add value to for our clients. It's not just about investment management and retirement income planning. It's also about tax optimization and how to minimize our clients' lifetime tax bill. So that's a big reason for me why I'm super excited about the independent space and very bullish on the independent space. Now, I will say, I've heard now some big firms are starting to try to adopt tax planning. Okay. I think Edward Jones is one of those. I saw this posted on social media. They're looking to bring on an outside consultant to adopt tax planning. But what I'd say in doing this for the last 4 years, very difficult to do this if you're working with 3, 4, 500 clients. Okay. Very, very difficult. I would say virtually impossible. And unless you have a large team, like 15 people that are serving clients, doing the investment management and also doing the tax planning, very difficult to do. So it's going to be really curious I'm going to be very curious to see how that plays out. But I know our firm, in terms of our capacity and the clients that we're serving, it's a big part of the value we provide to people. Number 4, last but not least, is technology. First and foremost, as I mentioned earlier, my practice is mostly virtual. So we serve people all over the country. Okay. So I would say 99% of our meetings are virtual. Sometimes we do have in-person meetings. We've got bunches of clients in Jacksonville, Florida, because that's where I lived for the last decade. Got a few clients that are now reaching out to us that are finding us here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. But for the large majority of people that are reaching out to us today, finding us through the podcast, finding us through YouTube, they will live all over the place. Okay. And so I think this technology piece is very, very important to be able to serve clients virtually. Okay. There are several different technology pieces to the puzzle that we implemented, I guess I'll say, to put it simply. What's cool about being independent is that we can adopt these new technologies and kind of swap things out and swap things in based upon the evolution of technology, which is evolving very, very rapidly. Okay. Whereas I remember I was having this conversation with someone who works at the firm that I worked with, and they literally are still using the same financial planning tool that I used when I worked there circa 2012. The same financial planning tool. Financial planning tools have evolved so much. And sure, it can probably get the job done, but certain areas, again, around the tax planning opportunities, they're light years behind, these big firms. And so I think being able to adopt the best technologies that are available to the financial services space today, which they're popping up, there are new ones popping up every day. And I think that's one of the value add, like it's a little overwhelming to be honest with you, but one of the value adds of being a member of XY Planning. So if you're an advisor listening to this and you're thinking about going independent, being a member of XY Planning Network is huge because Michael Kitces and his team, they basically this is what they do, is they vet all these technologies out there and they put them in a tech stack, and any member can go ahead and pick and choose what they want to select for their particular practice based on sort of the best of the best in the financial tech space. But there's so many things that we're implementing. Holistic Plan for our tax planning. Right Capital is our main financial planning tool. WealthBox for our CRM. Capitect for our portfolio management. iRebal for rebalancing within Schwab. And now with adopting AI, artificial intelligence, I mean, there's so much there. Okay. And so I think working at a larger firm, it's very tough for them to adopt new technologies. And this is a big reason why DOGE is coming in and cleaning house with the big bureaucracy, federal government, is because their technology is archaic. The LexisNexis CEO of the government space, the government side, he was interviewed in one of the first DOGE press or hearings, the DOGE hearings. And he said that fraud and abuse is about 20%, okay, in the government sector, whereas in the private sector, it's about 3%. And he said the big reason is because the technology is just outdated. The new technologies out there can easily eliminate a good chunk. Not all, fraud is always going to be there, waste will always be there, okay, especially in a big bureaucracy like the federal government. But if they could just implement this new technology, they could reduce fraud and waste. But it's very difficult for them to do that because they're a large bureaucratic organization with hundreds of thousands of employees. And so that's why I love being independent, because we're lean and mean. If we need to adopt new technology, boom. It obviously takes a little bit. There's a little bit of a sort of an initial runway of training and sort of bringing people onto the new system, but it's a little bit easier than working at the big firm. And I love the fact that as new technologies come out and as they evolve, we can select and choose based on who the clients we serve and if it adds value to them. But I think really I would summarize all of those, those 4 issues that I mentioned. I'd really summarize those. Deepening client relationships, focusing those relationships on the people that we really want to work with. I truly summarize the 4 things I just mentioned. I would really just summarize them. Like, it's allowing us to focus our time on the most impactful parts of our business. Working for big institutions, there's so much bureaucracy and there's so much waste. Okay. Having meetings just for the sake of meetings, trying to check all these boxes just to check the boxes, and just the redundancy of workflows. I feel like with our firm being independent, we can spend our time on the things that are going to add the most value to our clients and ultimately free up our time to spend more with our family, our friends, loved ones, and doing things that we want to do outside of work. I don't have any regrets going independent. I believe we're just getting started at this point in time. That's truly how I feel after 4 years now. I was telling Roberto this. I feel like we've just hit this spot now where we're kind of past the startup phase. We've survived the startup phase. Now I'm beginning to invest my revenue back into my business, hire good people, train good people, adopt great technologies, and then focus on bringing in the right type of people to our firm, the types of people that we add the most value to. But believe me, it was not the easier path, okay? I probably would have a lot fewer gray hair if I stayed on the corporate side, potentially. Which, by the way, if you notice, if you're watching on video, I did shave my beard last week. I told my wife, and I mentioned this on the YouTube last week, so I didn't even say it in the beginning, but I mentioned to my wife I was going to shave my beard before her birthday, which is this upcoming Sunday. So I went ahead and did that. So you can't really see the grays anymore because, I don't know, on camera, it sort of masks the gray in my hair, just maybe because I have so much of it. But it was definitely the harder road. And for me, I think that's just sort of my nature is like, I look at life as, a challenge. And when I'm not challenging myself and I'm not feeling challenged, I get a little bit bored. And so I saw this opportunity to go independent as a great opportunity for me to add more value to the people we serve long term. And I feel like we're just getting started. And I hope this kind of helps sort of get inside of my brain around, hey, there are some great benefits to working at a big firm. And if you're a client and you work with an advisor at a big firm, you can absolutely get the service you need, depending on your situation, working with an advisor at one of the big box stores. Okay. If you're an advisor just getting started in your career or looking to potentially become a financial advisor, there are some great reasons to join a big firm early on, to cut your teeth, get the experience, talk to a lot of different people in the industry that have been doing it for years, and even meet with a variety of different types of clients that you're kind of feeling out, hey, who do I want to work with? Do I want to work with young people? Do I want to work with sort of mid-career professionals? Do I want to work with business owners? Do I want to work with retirees? And really get clarity on that. But I think eventually you might hit this point where I hit 7, 8, 9, 10 years in of like, hey, we can potentially do this a little bit better. We can add more value to the people we're serving. We can cut out the noise. We can cut out the unnecessary tasks, the meetings just to have meetings, and cut out those unnecessary metrics and just focus on the ones that are going to add the most value to the clients that you serve. I think you'll find a lot of benefits going independent. You just need to be able to take on the risk. You need to have the backdrop to take on the risk. But if you do it, there's a lot of rewards on the other side. And again, I feel like I'm so grateful for, the clients that we serve. The relationships that we have within our practice are amazing. And I'm also super grateful for our team, Amy and Roberto, and for really helping the cause, to really help serve our clients, maximize our retirement spending, minimize our lifetime tax bill, and worry less about the financial markets. That's ultimately what we are looking to do. That is our mission statement. But listen, I hope you guys found this podcast helpful. And listen, if you have experience working with advisors at big firms, what's your take? What do you think about independence? Do you work with an independent advisor? What's been your experience with that as well? Would love to hear your take on this one. Just drop a comment right inside of the show. I think you can do this in Spotify, and of course you can do that on YouTube as well. And of course, make sure to subscribe and follow our channel if you are in that PFR Nation caliber, over 50, north of $1 million, and looking to create work optional in the next handful of years. You want to fire your boss, spend more time with your loved ones, spend more time with your family, doing things that you want to do, whether it be travel, golf, trips, whatever it is you want, or just do nothing. Who knows, right? But hopefully you guys found it helpful. And until next time, I'll see you next week.